Hello, I go by the viewer name Dave2, and today I'm going to be presenting my method that I do here on this YouTube channel that I'm calling the Advanced Intuitive Method for remote viewing. Little background on this, it's what I perform on all these videos. If you read the Dave2's Cowboy Remote Viewing Manual, that's what this is. It's an evolution of it. I released that about a year ago, but it was always meant to be Dave2's. From Dave2's Cowboy RV Manual, I posted a video about how Cowboy is kind of like an alternative protocol type thing. It's a mindset. That's a video back in my channel here. And then I was going to probably roll with the name Visual Remote Viewing or VRV. And I'd always been talking about this thing that I'm doing that I call the Advanced Perceptual Framework, APF. All of those are referring to the same thing. Hopefully I can stick with the name AIM, and we will see why it doesn't have remote viewing in the name. Overview. It is a methodology for psychic exploration. You can use it for remote viewing, which is blind targets. You can do front-loaded viewing. You can just do regular old psychic exploration like that astral temple meditation, which is unblind. And that can be used for personal gnosis. Or you could even do something like mediumship where you're front-loaded knowing that you're going to be interacting with some bios. And really, like, the same framework can be used in all of those. I think remote viewing has all this connotation that it has to adhere to a specific standard. I don't change what I do no matter where I go. I'm still operating under the same framework. So that's why I think that I should call it the intuitive method or something. I really like Brett Stuart's technical intuition. That's a great name. The evolution of these concepts does have a base in technical remote viewing, TRV. I do recommend Brett's book. I believe it's called Remote Viewing, the Complete Guide. You can get it on his website. I will link to it in the comments. That's going to provide the basis of most what you see here. It's really, as you know, a paperless form with a couple modifications. Instead of it operating as a rigid structure, we'll get into this in the next slide actually, it's more of like an adaptable framework. And the main thing here is that I think that this produces conditions that are conducive to have a bilocation experience through sensory replacement. And that's kind of the big piece here. The mindset of this method is that I'm not seeing it as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you will do this. It's more of like a collection of tools. I'm building my tool set of things that I could pop out in session. And yeah, we'll get into more here. That requires flexible thinking. Rigid thinking is, I call it the adjective problem, where it's like I have a fork and this fork is for Tuesdays. If I need a fork for Wednesday, then I need to go like rebuild a fork, or you just use the same thing in that other environment. I hear a lot that like, it's great what you do, like you go in and you just kind of like let it flow. That's not really what I'm doing. It's not rigid structure, but it is structure. There is an if-then plan that you'll see, and it really looks a lot like standard CRV or TRV, just with a couple things. The alternative here is that it's adaptable and modifiable. You can add things. I'm going to keep adding things to it as I learn more, and you can change on the fly what you want to pull out. So if you don't think an S2 is right, don't use an S2. The emphasis here is on ideal conditions. So I'm really big on sensory deprivation, and I'm really big on using an eye mask and using earbuds and stuff, trying to get that sensory deprivation, because I believe when you deprive all your senses, you allow them to get replaced with your psychic senses. And I also will get more into that. Everything here, I'm just going to stop saying that, and we'll dive really deep in this video. There's a big emphasis on this, that you are building a relationship with your subconscious. I know a lot of methods talk about that. The Ingo Swann book, the Natural Guide, everybody's guide to natural psychic stuff. He goes over that entire model and everything. It really hinges on that from a mindset perspective. Instead of logging everything to paper, one of the big points that I'm saying here is that the mind inside of your visual field, just like you did in that astral temple meditation in the last video, that is the canvas for your session work. And it really changes a lot of things when you do this. In order to block out your senses, put on an eye mask, not see anything, you can't have a pencil in your hand. So that's going to require focal logging. This is going to, with a microphone such as this, that's actually going to unlock a lot of things that we'll get into. And I really feel like some pretty special stuff can happen when you do that. Another statement or opinion that I'm going to make is that I believe that proprioception, that thing I talked about where your hands and spatial awareness know where they go with the nervous system, I'm making the statement that I believe that that is the dominant sense. From start to finish, the entire session is kinesthetic. You're always going to be using your hands. I think I've made the comparison before to the Minority Report where you're Tom Cruise interacting with a hologram. That's really a lot what it's like. There's also a really heavy emphasis here on mental state control. So as you've seen, I use EEGs, I use breathwork. I really try and control where I am in the session. As you are not focusing externally, but you're focusing internally, that really allows you to analyze your current state. And I do use a lot of breath work during the session. Sometimes it gets truncated out because it's silent. And but yeah, there's a lot of like trying to think about, am I in the right mentality? And if not, how do I shift that? This whole entire thing, it requires metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. And doing this whole presentation was like metacognition for me, thinking about thinking. Some of the tools that I'm going to talk about here are all of those CRV-based stages, S1 through S5. They still exist, but one of the biggest differences is that there's a persistent stage 6, at least in TRV, which is the three-dimensional exploration of the target. And you're just constantly expanding detail. You're constantly interacting with the target in that kinesthetic sense. The autonomic gestures that we use, instead of drawing on a paper, you're just going to be executing in the air, but we still do that. I use my body awareness exercise, that second body state, a thing that we'll get into called data packets, breathwork, timeline exploration, evocation, body scans, geolocation in here, mind probes, dowsing. There's really no limit to the tools that you can incorporate. You kind of come up with an if-then plan. If I encounter this in the session, then I will pull out this tool and find it useful. Some terminology, because this isn't like an exhaustive list. The target's still the target. It's the subject of interest. TRN, target reference number. This is the big one that I'm sure some people are going to be like, is I have renamed stages to levels. And there's a good reason for this. I don't know if I define it on this page or the next, so I'm going to keep going. And if it's not on the next, then I'll explain it. Instead, I'm also renaming AOLs to conscious interference CI. I have ingrained AOL so much analytical overlay in my vocabulary that when I say it in a session, I'm probably still going to say AOL. That's a little bit easier to say than CI. But what I want to do is distinguish between things that are consciously happening that I need to stop and things that are intuitive. Instead of AOL drive, I'm calling it conscious drive. Because as we know, there's AOL-S from the signal line, and there's AOL drive, AOL-D. And instead of that, I'm just calling it conscious drive, which is when the CIs in the session, the conscious interference, overwhelm the session, and the focus is on the conscious intent rather than the intuitive impressions. So if I'm building a castle in my head, that's me trying to consciously drive the session. The point of session work should be to be intuitive and to be listening to that. So this means that I have gone off focus and now I'm off describing something else. There's that concept of data packets that we're going to get into, which is a complex, symbolical, intuitive response that must be unpacked. I think that's usually when I get these. It's AOL-S coming from the signal line. It's some big symbolical thing where it's like it actually looks a lot like that. I have a whole slide on this topic. And this next one is the big one that I really want to get into. It's the reason for renaming AOL in general. And that's that if the opposite of consciously doing something here would be intuitively doing it. And I've come up with this concept that I call intuitive drive, ID, which is when the viewer receives so much intuitive information, so many responses, and there's just so many of them. You may hear in my session where I say, like, in the last 200 milliseconds, I had 6 things stack up. Those are these big complex data packets that are going to take a lot of time to unpack. Some people call them downloads and such. And that in order for me to unpack it, as I'm unpacking them, more are going to show up and I'm no longer in control of the session. I think in other methodologies, that would be seen as a bad thing. It might even be classified as AOLD. If this is a collection of what you would have called AOLS, and your intuition is completely just blasting you with information, great. That seems to be like the point. That seems to be like the epitome. And yeah, I think I have a slide on this too. So anyway, you want to drive it. If you want to keep using the terms AOLs, if you still want to call them stages, it is going to be confusing because I reordered them. If you want to call them subjects or whatever instead of targets, tomato, I think that's kind of one of the points of the mindset here is you can do whatever you want to do or don't. The method. Changes to the method. So if you already know a CRV-based method, then, and if you can't tell, like this whole presentation is kind of geared towards people that already know a bunch about remote viewing. Sorry if you're like totally new and all this is Spanish. Start with that TRV book I mentioned. The changes to the method: proprioception, kinesthetics, spatial awareness. Those are the dominant senses that I'm saying. Like that's really like one of the big opinions. Instead of stages, I'm calling them levels. And it's because, let me just see here. I don't know if I have a slide on this. Hopefully I do. Stages imply that you are only going to, like you're going to be in stage 1, then you're going to be in stage 2, then 3. But as we know at TRV, after the S3 aspect discovery stage, I'm going to go do S1 through S4, and I'm going to keep going back. So now I was in stage 3, now I'm back to stage 1. I really think it makes more sense to say I'm going deeper or I'm jumping back to the stack. Level 2 here is going to be home base for us. We're going to build out L2 after our initial connection in an ideogram. And as we go explore the target site, we always come back to level 2. And from level 2, you increase back up the chain. It's as I mentioned before, that perpetual stage 6 3-dimensional exploration. The TRV S3 site aspect discovery, I'm now calling that level 2 site discovery. It's basically the same thing. The dimensional probing as a L2 aspect. I don't even, I guess that was also called stage 3, but it was like stage 3 aspect where you said like X or A or B or something. If I'm already using the term 2 now, that means that S2, which is typically like your senses, that's just now level 3, and that's to properly do it after the kinesthetic aspect discovery. Like I'm saying, the kinesthetic exploration of the target comes first. So if that's L2, where you are trying to figure out what is at the aspect, then obviously all of the other senses are going to follow. And I do know that that's in the reverse order, and I'll get into that. S5 deconstruction as an intuitive process to convert analytics back to intuitive data by reprogramming. If you look at a lot of methods, they say that it's an analytical process where you are engaging that analytical mind. What I'm kind of saying here is that you had your conscious interferences, those AOLs. That was what you think was not intuitive data, but something that you consciously thought. So let's go take that and be like, why does it remind me of the target? Let's take those analytics and turn it back into intuitive data. Now, like I said, tomato, you can pull whatever tools in you want. If you want to engage your analytical mind in a session, which is not what I typically want to do, you can go back to whatever form of S5 you want to do. You can do a mind map, whatever, up to you. That intuitive drive, which I call the observational state, where you are in like peak observation mode, just the data is pumping, that emphasis on sensory deprivation and sensory replacement, not just probing. When you probe, you get like a little blip, right? But what we're doing right here is this is streaming consciousness. I have a continuous sense of sight, a continuous sense of sound. I have continuous touch. When you replace a sense, you get that continuous stream. ChatGPT isn't sentient because it is one trip down the neural network. If they had something that continued the stream and it fully replaced it, then maybe it could get there. That's what I'm saying with sensory replacement. You're not just doing these quick little one-off probes. You're really trying to replace all those senses together. Also in probing, you're always doing like one clairsense at a time. You're like, what does it look like? What is this? When you start to add that replacement, you're getting multiple senses all at the same time. Sensory deprivation, blackout eye mask. If you're in a dark room, I suggest purple light like this. If you close your eyes in purple light, this is something I learned from when my daughters were taking baths, looking up at the ceiling. I was all worried that their little eyes were going to get all injured and stuff. So I looked it up, bought some LifeX lights and Philips Hue, changed that light to purple, and it really is a lot less noticeable. If you've done like Mind Sight by Sean McNamara or anything, you're going to start to see through your eye mask. Like it is truly blackout, but you're still going to see it because that was the point, is like to build that sense. So if I'm in front of my computer here, I pull up fully black screens. I black everything out so that I'm in as dark of conditions as possible, that I really get it. Now, I think I put in here, I don't know too, maybe I did, but that, or maybe it was the other presentation. I have so much stuff going on. I'm so sorry. When you close your eyes, you're just looking at the back of your eyelids. Then you have to turn off your eyes as well. I think we'll get into that, but that's a piece to this as well. Hearing, I like the loop earplugs. They're great. They're reusable. The other thing that I do is if I have these on for the session, they either provide noise canceling or they also provide like feedback monitoring. Like right now, I slightly hear myself in there. Smells, you don't want to smell anything. You want to taste anything. You don't want to feel anything. If you don't want to wear clothes, go for it. Just comfortable, unnoticeable. If you're too hot, too cold, whatever it is, you can't really replace that because you have the stream that's coming in. Sensory deprivation flow tanks, great. Like that sounds good. The body position, I usually sit here, but like because you want to stay in that low mental state of theta or delta, possibly gamma, I do recommend that when you sit, you're like slightly reclined, but I mean like whatever really works for you. Logging. Logging is optional. Now, I think in all other methods, you have to log things down. But one thing that we've noticed by doing paperless stuff with a microphone is that logging can affect the probing process, like the data that you actually receive. Like I was talking about in the Hill video, as soon as I stopped the logging of the information, it's like the observer effect. The quantum woo-woo observer effect of the double slit experiment, for example, right? Just the fact that we're recording it changes the nature of the experiment that we're running. If you're running some like really interesting targets, or somebody says this, and like I guess like you won't even know because you're blind, but really try sometime just not logging. Just don't care if you got the recording of it. You can't go back and look, which is one of the issues. Like you can't evaluate your performance, but you will notice that different stuff comes through. So totally optional. The biggest thing here is because you're doing sensory deprivation, like unless you are really good at Mind Sight and can see through your glasses and stuff, you should audibly record your impressions. Video too, if you want. I've done that on a couple of these just to show people how crazy I look as I'm doing stuff. But audio is the big one. When you're recording all your sessions, you can state all the thoughts that you have and all of the impressions. Now, that is the thing that I think is the differentiator with this guy, is think about writing your summary for your session. If you only write 5 sentences, I swear, like by every single person, myself included, when I get to the end of that like 5th sentence, I'm like, I know. I'm so like physically writing takes up so much time and energy. If you get a complex data packet comes down, some big symbolical thing that you're trying to understand, are you going to be able to write all that? Or are you going to have to do an analytical process to try and chunk it down to explain it, right? What I'm doing on my sessions is I'm trying to turn my brain off as much as possible. And whatever comes out of my mouth is like as stream of consciousness as possible with as little thinking. I'm literally just, it is a translation process, but trust me, it is easier to translate into a lot of words that don't make sense to you at the moment than it is to try and do the compression algorithm to get it down to a single word, right? Or like a phrase or something that you can actually physically write. And that's huge towards going towards intuitive drive, opening up your intuition and getting that data flowing. As you do this, what is this next one? It's just talking about describing what you receive, see, hear, feel, experience. Everything that you experience should go down on that paper. Some people filter it out. I really try and not filter anything out. All of that could be data. If you hear a voice, if whatever happens, put it in there. And for your microphone, you could use earbuds. I like to use this boom mic. This boom mic. I'm using a Logitech Blue Yeti. This is a condenser mic, not dynamic. That allows me to get away from the microphone. And when I get away from the microphone, it doesn't completely go away. If you get a dynamic mic like the Shure SM7B or the USB version of that, you're going to have to get really close. And if you have to get really close, and otherwise like all the sound goes away, it's not going to record well. So if you get a boom mic, make sure it's condenser, make sure it's something that works at a distance like this Blue Yeti that I think is only like $85. As I mentioned, video optional. You can record to WAV, MP3, MP4, whatever you want to record to. But the record of your session, audio dominance. One sec. Okay, the workspace. This is probably the coolest part about the entire process. This is where you visually render all of your intuitive responses in your mental space. It is that empty black space in your mind's eye. And there it is, how to find your workspace. Close your eyes. Now you're looking at the back of your eyelids. Then you need to actually turn off your eyes so that you don't have any vision. And you should feel that three-dimensionality of the space. So like right now, I have two monitors here. I have lights. I have a wall. If I close my eyes, I can feel where those things are. There is a three-dimensionality to that black void, and that's really what you should try and go perceive there. When you try and like imagine things in your head, that imagination happens at a totally different spot. So from that three-dimensional void, right, try and imagine something like an apple or a skate park or just anything. There will be a physically different spot that all that stuff appears. That does absolute wonders for understanding the discernment between conscious interference and intuition, because now you have a visual distinction of where this data is rendering. When I'm trying to render stuff, I'm asking my subconscious, please go render it in the workspace. If I get intuitive data, we're going to draw it there. The process of if I can paint in that void, and I can consciously paint in that void with imagination, active imagination, then I can pass that paintbrush to my subconscious and say, hey, here you go, paint it here. And if it pops up in that other space that is not local to that three-dimensional void, I know that it's conscious interference. It really helps. And yeah, that's the next point about notice the other places where data can be rendered. Sometimes I'll say there's like a screen. That whole workspace feels three-dimensional in nature in front of you, like right here. And for some reason, like the AOLs pop up like a little mini map thing, like a picture-in-picture where it's like a flat rendering of something. And it's not directly in my field. It's more like if you like blocked off half your face and it was flashing, it's more like that, where the rest of it is like this clear, persistent image in front of you. And like seeing your hands when you're in VR, it's common that your spatial awareness of that, you'll see your hands in your workspace. You'll go execute an ideogram here, and you'll see like some sort of weird physical hand in there because like your brain kind of connects the dots. And as you're doing that exercise of finding the workspace and experimenting with it, try it out. Like just move your hands around in there. Get weird. All this stuff is crazy anyway. Like you might as well. To start the session, you should start an audible recording. I'll use Audacity oftentimes. You state your name or your viewer ID, like Dave 2, the date and time, the It's good to say like if you're on like the East Coast or like what time zone you're coming from. State any conditions of the session, such as if you have front loading or any context about what's going on. Your personal inclemencies, like you're sick or you're tired, you just woke up for a nap. I guess that'd be context, whatever's going on with you. Any preconceived notions or thoughts you had about the target. Sometimes I'm getting ready and I know I'm going to come up here and I'm going to record a target. I'll start getting information as I'm like walking up the stairwell. So after I start my session, after I state everything, I kind of started off with that. It's a little bit like logging in AOL and just getting it off the table. And is that the same thing? Oh, preconceived notions and thoughts. That might actually be different. I was just describing the impressions received prior. Preconceived notions and thoughts could be like, you know, the person that tasked you this, and you know that you were just talking to them about a particular topic. So you may be thinking like, did they task me with this? That's the spot to log it. And if you are going to do a cooldown, I do recommend starting the audio recording before your cooldown, because technically like the cooldown is part of your session. It is something that should be logged. So state what you're going to do, and also just state generally how you're feeling. You're feeling good that day? You're feeling bad? Maybe that's in like the context stuff. And this is adaptable. Anything that you want to include, like your physical location on Earth, tech, like if you have on an EEG, if you're using EMF, that's the thing that, you know, like locks your brain into the zone, like the neorhythm, and like what level of intensity you're using, like are you using 4 hertz or using the Schumann resonance, and any like magnetic or EMF shielding, like if you have it around your session space. You can state all that stuff there in the opening. It's also nice to just state it, because I swear it takes a while to write all this stuff down. Nobody ever really talks about the cooldown. So I was thinking like, rather than start with level 1, level 0 of your session after you started it is the cooldown. And the objective of this level is to enter a mental state that is conducive to the intuitive process. You've probably heard people say that it takes like 45 minutes or an hour and a half. I think everybody kind of knows that's a lot of time. I'm getting there in like 30 seconds to 3 minutes. It really, like, if you just spend 30 seconds doing some of this stuff, I'm usually in a zone where after I do the connection, I start to feel myself drop into session. So it doesn't take a lot of time. Number 1, empty your thoughts. Just as I was talking about in the Astral Temple video, if you didn't watch it, present moment, get to that point of focus. Do the body awareness exercise where you trace your entire physical body for mind awake, body asleep. That helps you get into that sensory replacement mode. And it's akin to the Monroe Institute Focus 10, which is that point of consciousness. For expanded awareness, where you're basically saying, I want to go feel the environment, I want to get more information than just what's close to me, you can do the basically like an exercise. I think I described it in the Astral Temple video as well, but it's like Monroe Institute Focus 12, where you can reball or something and you expand your awareness. I usually go to infinity. This, you would just go to the target space. Another thing I love using for cooldown is heart rate variability training for coherence. That's like the heart math stuff. If I start a session with this guy on, and I'm looking at my biofeedback, and I'm starting in like a 9 or a 10, I'm starting at a really good point where I know that I feel good, I get the vibrations going, and it really just is like a good time to start that. You can do breath work, the 4 heartbeats in, 4 heartbeats out. That kind of helps get it going. And I really do all this stuff at the same point, you know what I mean? If I'm wearing an EEG device, I get that brainwave state biofeedback. Then I can know, yes, I'm ready to start the session. And as you've seen in some of the videos, it's quick. Like, it's real quick to get into them. It's not going to take a lot of time. The other thing I always mention, I love to use, they're all Monroe Institute tools, kind of. If you haven't looked into their stuff, you're not doing the Gateway experience, I really recommend going over there, purchasing everything they possibly have, and getting started with that. The resonant energy balloon is great for psychic protection. So oftentimes, as I'm finishing up the cooldown, I will throw up a reball and then maybe do some expanded awareness for Focus 12. Now we are into level 1. This is the same thing as stage 1 in the controlled remote viewing derivatives. The objective of this is to establish that target contact and to initiate the intuitive query. Whatever you're looking to connect to, that's what we're trying to get to right here. Instead of executing it on paper because you have your eye mask on, what I'm saying is put up your hand, and you can say the target number if you want to. You can just say target and then execute that ideogram right in front of you. And as you do that motion, it should kind of look like holding a light on a long exposure picture, right? Where you're actually going to see this neon thing rendering in your visual frame. So when I do it, I don't just feel it, but I actually get to see what it looks like visually. Now, the problem with that is you don't get to record the impression. You could pause and like pull up your eye mask and like draw it real quick. You could execute one. I mean, like this is like as you're starting, you just keep a piece of paper, tablet or something there and execute the ideograms as you go along if you want to. The cool thing about doing it in the air is that it takes it from a 2-dimensional ideogram to a 3-dimensional ideogram. And when people start doing this, it doesn't take very often for, like the difference between like spirals and like energy spirals. Well, your energy spiral really starts to do a 3-dimensional. You really start getting into it, like interesting things happen. It can like go around your head or up or down. That type of stuff isn't possible on 2 dimensions. So you're going to open up like a whole different world of gestalts that you need to get into. And if you were visually recording this, I mean, like you could get a recording of the ideogram. I don't think that's very useful. And yeah, just like in the other things, A and B, F and G for feelings and gestalts or impressions, just record everything that you're feeling, experiencing. Did you have any conscious interference? Did you have any ideas or data packets that came down? What did you think about? Like, just if you think it or it pops into your head, say it. Like, don't worry about what it is, just say it. And here you can, what I like to do is I like to still decode my gestalts. There's multiple gestalts that are going to get drawn. It'll be complex. There'll be life and energy and structures. I still decode them, but I remain objective to the process. It's kind of like saying structure, question mark. Is it? Yeah, I wouldn't throw any weight into what you decode here, but I do find it helpful in trying to get that connection to the target. And like I was saying with those impressions, oftentimes this is accompanied with a quick data packet. When you start to get into the flow and like your subconscious is starting to give you big information and it knows that you're going to take this, it'll start off with this target that you're trying to connect to reminds me a lot of this other thing. Bad for building castles? Yes, but it happens. And adaptability, you can do it on paper, whiteboard, whatever you want if you want to record it. You can do one of these. You can do 3 of them. Whatever you want to do, change it. Like if sometimes I'll do one ideogram and I'll feel like I didn't connect well enough, so I'll sit there and I'll do another one. Same way that on paper you can trace it, where like you're feeling, it feels like you're in some like ridge on the target, right? Like where you're tracing over it and it literally feels like tracing a groove with a pen. Same thing, just do it with your finger over top of where you went before. You'll feel the little course corrections and nuances there. You'll feel if it's solid, you'll feel if it's liquid. A lot of cool stuff there with the kinesthetics. Transitioning from L1 to L2, I'm going to ask that you draw a circle around your ideogram and you're going to form it into a sphere with your hands. All of this is just one big ritual of intent. You're self-tasking right now, and you're self-tasking with 3-dimensional kinesthetics. And the intent that you're going to set is that for all of the data at the target site that you're looking for to be contained within the sphere. You're building your own little data packet where 3-dimensionally, I'm not just black boxing it. I'm saying I'm going to intentionally put all of the data from that query inside of here. If you do TRV, they look at target intents, the tasking, as a query of data from the information field, matrix, source, SCA, whatever you want to call it. So that's what we're doing there. Use your hands to do that. And after you feel like you've self-set the intent of getting this, take your hands on the side like you've squeezed the balloon or something, and you're going to pull it open. Just pull it apart. That zooms it open, and right there in front of you in your mental workspace, because your eyes are closed, your eye mask is on, you should start to see something three-dimensionally. And it doesn't have to be seen three-dimensionally. It can be felt proprioceptively. So same thing I was saying where you feel that three-dimensionality. The three-dimensionality of the space in front of you should be changed for good, which is great. That gets us into the level 2 aspect discovery kinesthetic probe. I guess this is a slide for like the whole thing. And the point of these level 2s for both the site and the aspects is to determine the shape and dimensions of the area that you are probing. And you do this with hand dowsing. So I don't have a pencil. So I can just use my hands constantly to try and feel what's in front of me. S2 site is for the whole target. So just like in your ideogram, you have multiple gestalts that you're looking for. As I look around the entire target site, I'm going to start to get dimensionals. Is it vast distances? Is there something here that I'm zoomed in on? And is there something way over there of some curvature, which would be the part of the earth? Do I have things on the side? Where is it just one thing in the middle? That is what typically S3, this says S2 site and S2 aspect. That's a typo. S3 site and S3 aspect from TRV. That is like the equivalent of what it is. And that's where like you're looking for all these different gestalts. And then we're going to go do mini sessions on each one of them. We're going to zoom in. So L2 site, aspect discovery, used to be TRV S3. The point of this is to discover the sub-aspects of the target to probe into, such as different gestalts. So let's say I have a big structure in the middle, I have a life form underneath of it or like in the middle of it, and land on the bottom. Each one of those is going to be something that I'm going to want to go dive into. And the way you discover it is if you don't initially see it, which oftentimes you won't, you could kinesthetically or proprioceptively feel it, where like you just know and feel that it's in front of you. But when you put your hands on it, take that hand and just like bring it from the side on both sides. You'll get this like weird tingly, pushy gel-like feeling on your hands. It's very weird, but that kinesthetic feeling, you'll pretty much instantly get the hang of it once you see it. And the point of this is to determine the boundaries of the different things that are there so that we can go dive into it and do those sub-probes. Do colors, do intangibles and intangibles, or tangibles and intangibles. We're going to get into all that. Deciding which one to go experience first, that's where you just need to like intuitively probe which one of these is the most important. We'll label that X. And then for all the other ones, just kind of like sit there and make a mental note to call them A through Z. This space that you see like after you open up the ideogram and you're in your workspace, you have this three-dimensional thing in front of you. That is your home base that we're going to return to that after we go dive into each aspect. And at the bottom it says adaptability. You can discover, then explore each aspect, then continue with aspect discovery upon returning to L2 site. So let's say like in the middle, I found a person. I can open up the person and just go do that right now. I don't have to look at everything. I'm gonna return to my home base instead of like when we do TRV. There's you do your S3 site and then you go off to do all your sessions. You kind of like remember that you had, like an X, an A, and a B. In here, in order to get to A or B, I have to close out X and I gotta go find the other one and get to it. So you can do your aspect discovery continuously. If it's a time-based target, your workspace might change as you go about exploring the target. You may do some time exploration and see how things change in front of you. Moving from L2 site to L2 aspect, it's kind of like that same thing that we were talking about with the Minority Report, you have the holographic thing in front of you. Maybe you don't see it. It's just the proprioceptive feel. You're going to grab that aspect with your hands and you're going to pull it apart to zoom open. So if you have like a little tiny person sitting in front of you, or like you may just see it as like a loop gestaltically, you're going to take that thing that's in front of you, you're going to open it up and just make it bigger in front of you. That's really what it is. And you just kind of position it close within arm's reach so that you can interact with it. If there's no visual contact there, maybe you have aphantasia, don't worry. Try and proprioceptively feel the spatial distance with it. And this last note says, executing L3 sensory impressions will fill out aspects in the workspace. So if you don't see visuals, when you probe for visuals, you might actually start filling in the details there. The L2 aspect kinesthetic probe, the objective of this is you've connected with the target as a whole. One of the things I loved about TRV was I was always wondering like, okay, we're doing L2 or S2 for the whole target to get sensory impressions, and then we're doing intangibles on the whole target. Now when I move, like let's say there's like 5 different gestalts there, shouldn't I be doing like 5 mini sessions? And that's what you do in TRV. So here you're trying to, for this kinesthetic probe, the first thing that you do when you connect, you can do an ideogram for this as well if you want, like an L1 aspect. But the first thing that we're going to do is like you open it up and you're starting to feel the dimensions of this aspect. So handouts, the whole thing, same thing that you did before, try and get that structure. Sometimes you'll just see a box to start. If it's a structure, it just looks like, you know, a cube, because that's what gestaltically we see like right angles. And as you start to interact with it, you're like, it's artificial, but it's round and it's cylindrical. So those are like the different things that will start happening in your visual space. And because you're doing dimensions right now, you can make that your first probe in your sensory experiences, which is the next one, L3. And right now, I wouldn't necessarily dive into motion. When they talk about like you need to open the signal line to get dimensions, and that's why dimensions is usually probed last in sensory. Well, this whole time, the only thing that you've done so far, you haven't even done any clear probes besides physically interact with the target kinesthetically. If you feel motion detected, describe and report it. But I really think that that one can actually wait till the end. So you've gone into you've done your ideogram for the target. You've opened up L2 to discover all the aspects that are at the target. You've seen it. You've picked one of the aspects. You've zoomed into it. Maybe you did an L1 ideogram for it and decoded it. You did the same handousing to get the shape of it. Now we're on to level 3, which is sensory impressions, what S2 was in all of the CRV-based methodologies. This is to probe through, the level objective here is to probe through all of the clair senses, your psychic senses that are associated with the physical senses, and extracting that sensory data about the aspect. Typically, if you were to put all your sensory impressions in one thing, you would say level 3. And then if you really wanted, like if you were writing it down, for instance, dimensionals would have been last. Here, you can just describe your L2 data. It's kind of already been done. You already were describing it as you did in L2. So dimensionals is kind of like off the chain here. And then you can change the order of this. I like to keep it what I learned because I think it's good. Color, texture, smell, taste, temperature, sound, and motion there comes in at the last. That is after sensory enrichment. As I see colors start to fill out that visual workspace. As I feel texture, a little bit like if you have this in front of you, I know what it feels like in front of me. I know there's something soft and fluffy, such as the little eye cups, or like if you had a teddy bear in front of you, you'll proprioceptively feel that fluffiness in front of you. As you get smells, the whole environment, instead of you just getting like a little whiff, kind of persists in the workspace. You keep getting that, and it starts to build out. Taste and temperatures, if it's hot, then the whole session is going to kind of feel hot now. Like you're bringing it in, and sounds will persist as well. So after you have all that, motion's a lot easier to pick up on. It's kind of like bringing detail to a 3D wireframe in a video game, where it starts out as like a regular box, and by the end of it, you have this fully formed textured thing that's now going to get tossed into motion. Let's see here. Each sensory probe can come in as its associated clair, like clairaudience for verbal words, or clairvoyance for visuals. But the other one is as you're probing them, each one can come in claircognizantly, which is clair-knowing. So you could see the color red, or you could just know that it's red. I know some people who are 100% claircognizant viewers. They only get a sense of knowing throughout their entire session. That's fine too. I'm very visual in that regard for that, but other senses like taste, for some reason, I will try and taste it, which is, I think, clairgustance or salient, maybe clairsalient. It's one of them. It's usually that just comes in as a sense of knowing. I don't actually taste it. I don't know why. So, and like active imagination, the Carl Jung concept, the more of these senses that you engage, it enriches the clarity of your workspace. Like I was talking about, you're filling it out. If you've done the active imagination stuff where you close your eyes, you turn them off, you're in that space and you're starting to build it out like Inception, just like in the temple meditation, the more senses you go activate, the richer the experience. You just went through and did that as part of your level 3, where you've now engaged everything to fill it out. And as I mentioned before, with adaptability, you can change the order of any of these probes if you want to. But yeah, it's up to you. Next up is level 4, previously stage 4. So this one got to stay the same. The level objective here is to extract higher level conceptual data for perceived aspects. This is the tangibles and intangibles. You can still, I'm skipping the S2 column where it's like, give me sensory data, give me dimensionals, then you get into AI and EI. You just did that. There was no stage 3 drawing in the middle. I just described my S2 and dimensionals. Now I don't need to go do it again. I believe in the original, it's like the S2 for TRV or CRV, you're supposed to go from the list of vocabulary words. So that's that crunching down of data I'm talking about. Just the act of like getting data and having to analytically compress it is going to put your brain in an analytical mode. And then when you get to stage 4 in those methodologies, you're supposed to be like, okay, now free form. What S2 impressions do I have free form? So I'm allowed to step outside of the vocab sheet, right? I'm kind of saying the whole time you may not have had a vocab sheet, you should go learn a vocab sheet just so you know you have the vocabulary available to you. But the whole time you can just like sit here and talk. You can be like, chartreuse, I remember it as green or maroon or whatever it is, that Mandela effect. You have that long form explanation where you can share your impressions. You don't have to compress it down to the vocab sheet. So we are skipping S2 and D because we just did it. We don't need to go do it again. And we are not using explicit vocab sheet and extension. It's the same thing in here. When you state the thing that is tangible, I'm taking this from monitoring advice. And monitoring advice is always to echo back what the viewer experienced about the target. And you don't give them feedback. You don't say like, can you go describe more about the structure? You say, move to the optimum position of the perceived structure or the structure that you perceived and describe it. So here, if I'm declaring a tangible, I typically will say the perceived biological. And that's the same thing as decoding the gestalts. I'm putting a question mark on it where I'm staying objective. I'm saying I'm perceiving it as this, but I'm open to the data changing. I'm not making a decision. After you do that, this is where you get intangibles, and you can come up with any list of questions that you want. If you listen to my recordings, I typically sit here in a loop and I say, what is intangible about the perceived thing? So like, what is intangible about the perceived bio? And from there, I start to get all sorts of impressions. I may get something that's knowing. It may be a single word, but oftentimes this is where those data packets are going to start flooding in. I'm going to start getting large level concepts that kind of like come in, and it feels kinesthetically like a ball. And I have to go open up that ball, just like we're talking about, and explore it the same way with feeling my hands and trying to get all the probes. Sometimes they're instantly knowable, and I can just report that there. Instead of stopping at any point, I want you to run this data stream dry. So keep asking what is intangible about the perceived thing over and over and over again until you don't get a response. If you have other questions that you want to ask, perfect time to do so in here. And you are free to spatially move about the aspect to ask those additional questions. So if before, like, you're kind of black boxing it where, you know, you're like, move to this position. It's like those old text games that used to happen in Adobe on the internet, right? Where you'd be like, move here, and then like it's a dark room and I only have text to kind of interact with the room. This, you have the thing in front of you. So the reason why you should still make that statement about what you're doing is just for the record. But with your hands, you can like move the perception of the thing that you're doing. You can spin it around. You can push it down. You can zoom in. You can zoom out. If you have like a biological in front of you, you can zoom into their specific cells. Do whatever you want, but make sure you state everything that you do, because this is the recording of the session. After you have extracted the information from the aspect, this is where you move back to the L2 home base for the session. So upon doing it, you have it. You can basically put your hands way outside here and you push it back in. You zoom out, and then you see the whole session workspace all over again. And in between doing that, new aspects may appear. You filled out a part of the picture, a little bit like StarCraft, or I don't know if like World of Warcraft is like this, but the map that starts in the game, it's all blacked out. You have gone and enlightened a piece of the picture. So as you enlighten pieces, you fill out the picture, other aspects of the target site may start to reveal themselves to you. Note here on L5 deconstruction, formerly stage 5. The objective here, as I mentioned, is to convert potential analytical data from conscious interference back into intuitive data. And it's like probing those CIs to get the intuitive data and logging all the intuitive responses. The thing that I like to ask is, why does X remind me of the target? So why does the Eiffel Tower remind me of the target? And then instead of trying to like analytically think like, okay, it's made out of metal. It could be that it was at the World's Fair, and you're actively thinking. So if I had on my EEG, I'd be doing that. I'm asking my subconscious. I'm saying, subconscious, why does X remind me of the target? And I'm waiting for that intuitive response, and I'm going to log it. Now, you could still end up with AOLs here. That's fine. We're at least trying to take the analytics and convert it back to session data using our intuition. And here, one of the things I like to do is practice the 5 whys. That is a concept of, I think it's like Kanban philosophy, or I learned it from like the Toyota manufacturing process stuff, but it's always asking why. So why did this happen? And why did that happen? And why did that happen? And why did that happen? And until you get to the root of the question. Just go look up the Wikipedia page. It makes sense. After you've finished all of your aspect probes, or in between, like if you just did X and then you did A, and now you have 2 things, you're like, there's a person and a structure, go probe the relationship between the 2 things. This is done in TRV. It's after the site summary, sometimes after the stage 6 that they do, which is after the whole session is done. That's when you can go do something like this. And so the level objective here is to probe the relationship between 2 of those aspects, usually just for conceptual data. There usually isn't going to be sensory stuff in a connection between 2 things. So when to invoke it, after all aspects are done, or 2 or more, that you have that, whatever feels pertinent. And the thing that I like to ask on repeat here is, how are these connected? Like, why is it important? And continue asking that until all the data feels extracted. Before we get into the concept of data packets and intuitive drive, I think we get to just give like a quick rundown of data types. In software engineering, this is kind of like foundational. It's usually chapter 4 of a beginner book or so. And the responses that we receive usually can get classified into different categories. If you're a beginner, you're going to get really simplified data. As you get to be more advanced, your subconscious is going to want you to handle more and more data. As you improve, you're going to start getting that symbolic stuff there, and it's in increasing orders of complexity. So at the most basic, you have binary data, which is 2 choices, binary, 2 choices, yes or no, ones or zeros, this or that. That is a form of forced choice, but after that, you have more complex forced choice or an enumeration, which is multiple choice from a finite list of words. So for instance, like you learn all the colors of the rainbow, white, gray, and black, that would be first choice enumeration. And the more words that you know in there, kind of like the more you have to go play with. After that, when we're talking about like the intangibles, is single word. It's still forced choice because, like language has limits to it. There's a certain number of words that we actually know, but it's still, that's more complicated than a small finite list of things in a category. So single word typically comes out in intangibles. The next step after you start getting single words and knowing or hearing is you start getting multiple words. So a phrase or something that usually comes out in those L4 intangibles. What most people think happens next is sentences and paragraphs, like it gets conversational. But going back to Carl Jung with the active imagination, he also said that symbology is the language of the subconscious. So these high-level analogies of, I could give you these 18 pieces of information, but instead I'm just going to give you a very good metaphor or analogy. In my Space Monkey session, I said the target was a monkey that went to space, and the analogy that I was given was, it's a lot like a monkey going to space. So the target can be named in this process where it's saying it's a lot like this. It's that high level analogy. It's usually highly visual and it's just packed with data. That is the thing that we're really looking forward to get in a session. Data packets. The language of the subconscious is symbolic, and this is how they get represented. When all data, this is an opinion statement that I'm making, but when all data is accepted with gratitude, the subconscious will start sending these metaphors. This is a lot like that. This is that higher level conceptual data, the aggregates of all the smaller data instead of just single probes. It's not like just the color or just the texture, just the smell or taste. It's everything. As I was mentioning before, I kind of feel like it's this spherical thing that just shows up. Like you just get like this ball of, it's like a weird mirror holographic ball thing that like pops up into the session. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you feel it there, and you can reach out and like, that's where it comes from. These typically, like, that you got the thing to unpack in a split second, but like you have to go unpack it. You got to open it up. You got to unpack it. It's a download of info that you like need to go process. Instant knowing, you instantly know it, but for some reason, like you still have to go through what does it mean. When you're typically probing, you're just looking to write down a single color or something. Logging it here with the audio allows for the long form explanation of what you received. Sometimes it could take minutes to explain what it is that you got. That's how complex things are. If you had to explain for minutes on paper, it's going to take too long. It's going to be too much analytical stuff. You're going to be engaging the conscious mind too much as you are executing all of your senses and like thinking about it. Just stream of consciousness with your eyes closed that's still engaging the target. Like we don't think about talking. We don't think when we're in the car, we turn it off, we unlock the door, we open it, we unbuckle our seatbelt. We don't think about any of that stuff. We're on autopilot. I'm on autopilot right now trying to talk. That's what you're looking to do when you record this data. And you can explain these long form data packets in that way pretty well. And sometimes those data packets are so large that you're going to need to execute some of these leveled tools, right? You may want to do an ideogram on the thing that shows up. You may want to do S2. You may want to get tangibles and intangibles about it. Like they can be very broad and send you off on a wild goose chase. But it's pretty undeniable when you're going to see an AOL in that screen that I was talking about here. This is something totally different when you experience it. You're like, that is a packet of data. And as I was saying, vocal reporting of all this is going to encourage recording of those impressions and being grateful when they come in and not just discarding it, not just being like, I'm too good for this. I'm going to stick to my small probes. The more you have gratitude for these, the more of these metaphors your subconscious will sign. That leads us into that concept of intuitive drive, ID. And this is when the intuitive impressions are coming in so hot, so quickly that they're stacking up and must be unpacked by the viewer. As they are stacking up and you're trying to unpack them, more are showing up. The data is symbolical and complex, and I'm saying don't interrupt that flow. If you came into the 2 remote viewing session with a goal to capture intuitive data, that's the goal. Trust this data that's coming in. You're experiencing it, log and report it. Show that gratitude. So much of this is repetitive. Sorry. And you'll start getting more of them. Once your intuitive drive ID is done, you can totally just go return to whatever place you were in the session. As I was saying, you're in an observer state. You're not building a castle. You can go right back to your level 2 or level 3 or 4. You can go right back to doing whatever you were doing. It's still going to be there. Trust me, you can go spend 5 minutes listening to all of the intuitive data that you're getting and explaining it and just go right back. Your game plan when you go do a session is the leveled process. And when you start to get things where you're not in control, that's fine. Your subconscious is running the show. Let it run the show. That was kind of what you signed up to do in the first place. I think it's great. There's another point on here that I don't remember, but maybe I'll remember by the end of this video. To close out the session, you can give a self-summary of the whole thing. Some of the additional probes that we like to ask is what would I regret about the session? That usually will point out something that you forgot to explore, should have explored deeper. You can ask, what does the feedback look like? As I self-intent in that L1 to L2 transition, I'm not trying to get just the tasking. I'm trying to get the target, the actual thing, right? There's a difference between getting the going to the Eiffel Tower and just getting some query data about the Eiffel Tower back, right? I can probe into what the tasking wants, but this is a good spot to ask. I know I'm going to get feedback. Actually render it for me. Show me the feedback. Show me the picture, the video. Try and discern what that is. You'd also ask, would this satisfy the tasker? Some people, this is the whole flexible thinking here. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? You don't have to only view the feedback. You don't have to only view what the tasker wants. These can be sub probes as you're trying to get all of the data out of the session about this. As you close out of all that, zoom out of your workspace. So take that, turn it back into a little thing, close out of it. And then at that point, you can say, it's 10:41 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 17th, 2025, end session. Stop the recording. You'll probably notice I did not mention drawings at all. I believe that The viewer should remain focused on the mental sensory experience that they're building in their mind while they're doing it. I don't have any problem remembering what I do in session. So I can go on after the fact and I pull out my tablet like immediately after. And then typically like I'll go down, my kids are there or something. And that's when I'll like really like draw all of my impressions. So the first thing I do after that, take everything that I did and draw after that for the session debrief file. Because if you send somebody a 45-minute audio session for a project, they're not going to like you very much. Like we got to get that back into paper and into something that is easily compressed and summarized, which we're going to get into that. So if you utilize autonomic drawings like the S3 site sketch and stuff, a lot of that is supposed to be, you know, like you're kinesthetically feeling where it is. I would still say like after the fact, when you do your drawing, you can still do that. One of the things about TRV stage 6 was, why do, like if I have to take a break after 45 minutes and I'm an hour and a half into the session, as I get to stage 6, I'm now taking my second break, then I could have just started with stage 6 full 3D exploration the whole time, right? You can still do your autonomic drawings after the session ends as well, where you pull it up and you do that. Or like I'm saying, you can do whatever you want. You can remove your blindfold and you can make the movement commands, do your autonomic sessions during the session. I just think that interrupts the flow of what you're doing, right? Like you're building up the sensory experience. It takes time to get that hardened and real. So I think it'd be a shame to wreck it. Just do it all after. That's my opinion. As I mentioned, giving someone a long audio file, they're not going to listen. It's annoying. Take what I like to do with that session audio, especially if I record it in Audacity, is I'll amplify it to like max volume and then I'll normalize it down by like 2 decibels. That's what I'm probably going to do on this video. That's why my voice sounds like so booming and everything. For pacing, the other thing that we can do is truncate all the silence. Like I was saying, I have lots of we can take all of that out of the final recording, and if somebody does want to listen to it, they will get something that is at least entertaining to listen to. And I usually save both versions. I have the raw version and the silence version. For this next bullet point is about transcription. When we were trying to figure out how to make these audio files more ingestible, I signed up on Otter AI. I've also signed up on Riverside FM. They both can now take audio files or video files and transcribe them, which is awesome. They're using AI to do it. It's like $10 a month for both. But when I do that, there's so many minutes that I have access to now that I take the unprocessed file and pass that. Because if you truncate all the silence, it won't do as good of a job getting the transcription for you. Once I have the transcription of the session, I pass that into a large language model like ChatGPT. And this is so fun because I don't write any of my summaries. I don't write any bullet points. I don't write anything in that document besides pretty much the TRN and like some of my conditions. Everything else comes out of the LLM, which means that it's basically like having a free analyst of all the data. That session summary, you know, handwriting 5 to 10 sentences, the brutal feeling of doing that where you're like, ah. And what's really cool about doing that is then you have an objective summary. It's what, you know, an outside influence, even though it's AI, thought was important about the session. You're getting a true summary without your own bias in it, which is great. Typically what I do is I ask it to produce a summary from the session. A ChatGPT log now has history to it, so it knows that the transcript is in there. And then follow it up and ask for a bullet point list of the main points from the session. I ask it if I went through and I did like L3 of X or L1 of X and L4 of A, I can ask it to extract all of that data. You do have to teach ChatGPT a little bit. So you say, you know, L3 is these sensory impressions. Please go extract them in this form. And boom, it can do all that for you. You can list your conscious interferences. That's something I did recently. So if I say AOL in the session, I just ask ChatGPT, go extract and give me a bullet pointed list of all the things that I mentioned as an AOL. It'll go do it for you, which is really cool because I don't even think you can do that in a paper session, right? Like they're scattered throughout 20 pages of data. Here you have one page with everything that you think you imagined or logged that way. And yeah, you can take those visual descriptions that you did verbatim in the transcript. You know exactly what you said long form. You can take that over to like Midjourney or DALL-E inside of ChatGPT and start generating some AI images from it, which is pretty sweet. So that leads us into this session debrief file. And that's usually what I have up on the side of my screen and presenting. And the purpose of this is to present and report the data from your session, the insights quickly and effectively so that you're not burdening people with, a long form thing of stuff. Nobody's got time for that. The file should include the TRN, viewer's name or ID, the tasker's name or ID if you know it, the conditions of the session. I like to use my F scale, blind to unblind, F0 to F5. If you already know the tasking, I put it in there as well. Any personal statements or insights, that'll actually show up on the main points of the session. It usually includes a couple bullet points about things that you stated there. Somehow ChatGPT knows what's up, knows to include that. All of that stuff that you produce in the LLM, you should put in here. And at the very end of it, I end up putting the transcript. I think since this, I realized drawings are more impactful to people. So right after the session summary now, I try and place all the drawings and the generated AI images, such as, like a monkey in space from the transcript. The very end, one of the things I do with the transcript is it comes in like one big single line. I do use regular expressions to get the period and space, and I make every single sentence with ending in a period end up on a new line. Now, because all of it was verbally reported and you have a transcript, this is the coolest thing. The coolest thing about this whole thing is that you can now search every single thing that you said or logged in your entire session. As I've been reviewing other people's sessions for projects, I have the PDF open, I'll hit Control F and I'll go to search. There isn't search for a scanned file, right? Like I can't actually go search for words. So if I want to know, did I say this in the session for my future news? And I talked for 40 minutes, I can go find it. I can't even tell you how useful it is. It's so great to have that available to you. And you get that because of the audio and transcription reporting. So these files are great. I'm going to keep coming up with ideas to make them better. I still think it's good to show all of the data in the way that people are expecting. Sensory impressions, the L3, S2, tangibles and intangibles, list of AOLs, deconstructions like S5, L5, whatever you want to call it, and all these other tools that we're going to go into. You can literally just tell the LLM to go extract it all for you, which is great. Someday, maybe with agentic AI in the next year, we will have an entire system that's just here's the transcript, give me a file, get done. You don't have to even do anything after that. It'll just get better from here. To review, this is the structure of a session. If it looked like I was saying, it kind of hurts my feelings when people are you just go in there and just kind of ramble. And I don't think you realize there's so much going on here. This is the structure of a AIM session of what I'm doing on these. Start the recording, cooldown, connection, aspect discovery for each aspect. I did skip L1 aspect in this thing, but you can connect each aspect with an ideogram and decode. You do the kinesthetic probes for each one, sensory impressions with L3, conceptual data, the tangibles and intangibles with L4. At any time, you can do an L5 deconstruction can be invoked. And also at any time, this intuitive drive can kick in. If you had intuitive drive on the second aspect in L3, let it run its course, come right back to where you were before. And just continue. Your game plan is L0 through L6. Everything else that comes in is just kind of like a bonus. After you finish up all that, or you finish up 2 aspects, you do relationships, then you close the session and stop recording. And that's not even including these other tools we're going to get into. I am an hour and 15 minutes in. Yeah, a lot more to go. Optionally here, what you can also do is, I'm not a total big fan of either of these. Doing in TRV, I always thought it was weird that you only do stage 4 on the aspects. But like, there's big concepts on the entire target anyway. So sometimes I will end up doing an L4 site where I'm asking for that, what is intangible about the target in general. And sometimes I do that at the end of the session. Where I execute this tool is kind of, like a play-by-play. The other thing I don't like is sensory impressions on the entire target, because it's a little bit like being like, what colors are in this picture, as opposed to like, what color is the mountain, what color is the sky, what color is, like the lake. It doesn't really include the detail there, and you're going to get all that from the aspects anyway. So I put those as optional here. Like I said, you can include anything you want. Quite a few typos on that page. Let's get into the experience of what it's like to experience a session. So these aren't great. I tried to produce them, but it really feels like a holographic projection. If after my my ideogram, I connect in, I open it up. Let's say I have no kinesthetic data about what it looks like, but I know that I decoded it as a structure. When I put my hands up, the first thing that I usually get is just a cube. And that's because it's the 3-dimensional gestaltic representation of a cube, or of a structure. Now, if you don't see anything, that's fine. You should just feel that there is something in front of you, not with your hands, but proprioceptively with your mind, and then also with your hands there. We're going to get into geolocation. If I see the Earth from space, typically everything kind of has this like blue astral hue in it to start. It's usually like a bunch of dots as well. And then here's another one of like the bio is always just very holographic, like just looking like that. Not a lot of details and things, but it is cool to see, and it's very vibey and neon-y. You may see something completely different or nothing at all. It's okay. And I do see it in this level of brightness and clarity. When I first started, though, we were like at a 1 on the aphantasia scale. This is not the same as rendering imaginative data. That workspace area is something totally different that you're going to need to go train. We didn't talk about movement commands. So navigation through this, we kind of did. As I was saying before, when you move in paper sessions, it's very black box, like make a movement here, and then I'm going to start describing black box again. In this, you're doing that 3-dimensional physical rendering of all of your psychic impressions. So you're always moving around. The exercising of spatial... this is an exercise in spatial awareness. So if you haven't done... one of the reasons why I recommend doing the astral temple meditation is it's about moving your awareness around. Physically moving in what I call psychic space. And it's hard. Like I mentioned in the temple meditation, there's the skipping that will happen. Unless you practice moving your awareness physically through space a lot, you're going to have these skipping aspects, and it's going to be hard. So the more you can train that skill, the better you'll do handling your workspace. Focal point, focus 10, focal range, including the target space in your awareness. In that second body state where you have your kinesthetic hands that are there, those are all useful. Use those hands to manipulate the target area. That's the real movement. And just describe the movements audibly, because that's going to be your record. That's going to be what shows up in the transcript of your session debrief that you can go search for. But yeah, you're not really like stating it. You need to go move the target in front of you in your workspace. And yeah, train with those visual meditation exercises, awareness displacement, and use the temple meditation. This is the big one. When people say that there's a sixth sense, usually they're referring to claircognizance. And then Lynn Buchanan's book is The Seventh Sense, where he's talking about spatial awareness and proprioception being the seventh. I would argue that there's actually 12 senses. It's because there's 5 physical senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. And for each physical sense that is physically hooked up, like my neurons, my neurological system throughout my body is actually bringing input data from my eyes back into my brain somewhere to hit my neocortex and go through like the whole process, right? I have an equivalent sense somewhere. We don't know how it works, but I don't think the data is coming from my eyes, right? It could come from a cluster of neurons above my heart. It could come from the pineal gland, the cave of Brahma, who knows? But I have this other channel of input data that we call clairvoyance. So each one of these senses has its associated psychic clair. And after that, you have that knowing, and pervasive across both physical and psychic, regardless of either, is that sense of physical spatial awareness, your 12th sense. Oh, the big one here on sensory replacement, you remove your visual sight to make way for clairvoyance. You remove your physical hearing to make way for clairaudience. You remove physical touch of real things so that you can feel it with clairsentience. Same thing with smell and taste. And you remove your thoughts so you can have clear knowing. Bilocation experiences. This is like the pinnacle of what everybody wants to have, which is where, like I'm making target contact and then bam, I'm there. I'm at the volcano or I'm standing outside of there. One of my questions is if you are only expecting to have a bilocation experience when you are going through and you're probing, just for clairvoyance, you're like, what does it look like? The color. What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And you're doing singular one-off probes, and then you're going back and forgetting about it. How are you going to build up that experience? So the entire process here that we're doing of sensory deprivation and filling in the senses within our workspace, that's really making it conducive to having a full sensory experience, where instead of probing the chain one at a time, now I'm getting that full sensory experience as I bring it to life. It's the same way the active imagination works, where you start off with nothing, and the more you engage, pretty soon you're in like a waking lucid dream-like state. When all the senses get replaced, the viewer has produced that state where they are now conducive to a bilocation. In the Space Monkeys one that I didn't bilocate, but the target contact I was talking about was I was 3-dimensionally there at this rocket with a monkey in it, shooting off. Like all of the stuff was there. I was in that state that was conducive to having that bilocation experience, which is pretty great. More tools that you can use. Breathwork. Main goal here, the objective of this tool, control your mental state. When to activate, literally all throughout the session. You should always be paying attention to that internal state. It becomes a little bit like breathing, where, you don't think about breathing. You should probably not even be thinking about this control. You feel yourself raise up, so you execute a specific type of breath movement in order to change your state. The counting measure that I like to use is my heartbeat. So the standard measure of a breath for me is 4 heartbeats. So you'd breathe in 4 heartbeats, breathe out for 4 heartbeats. The 3 types of breathing that I like to do is just for regular old coherence of just feeling good, in 4 heartbeats, out 4 heartbeats. You can use an exhalation hold, where you as you breathe out, you then hold for an additional 4. So in 4, out 4, hold 4. And then you don't keep the breath in as you're depriving yourself of oxygen. You'll fill your state lower. If you need to raise your state for some particular reason, which usually I'll do as I'm coming out of the session or something, I will reverse it and do the inhalation hold, where I hold in that breath. In 4, hold 4, out 4, instantly breathe in again, not depriving myself of that. And I'll feel my brainwave state raising. For biofeedback on if the breath work is working, that's why I use an EEG. It can show the lowering towards delta using an exhalation hold, or the raising towards the towards beta, like higher levels of conscious analytical thinking, which is what I think is less conducive for psi. And that would be from an inhalation hold. The tool I mentioned that I really like using, and I try and use it every session, is geolocation. So let's say that I get a sense that it's on Earth. The objective of this is to globally identify the location of the target or an aspect of the target. So like two things could be separate. I was mentioning like if you had a plane that goes cross-continental, you could try and probe it there, right? For like the different parts, like this one's over here and this in Florida and the other one's in England. So when to activate, just like when you want to know where something's located. When I activate this, it's like an Earth thing kind of like instantiates over my workspace. And it's kind of like pauses everything else and just brings it here as this hologram. And then the mental projection of it kind of like rotates to the appropriate area. The other thing I can do is I can use hand dowsing, where I start to feel that something is in a particular spot. And it's this like magnetic push and feel that you have. Off-world locations are an interesting one. Now, another way that I train this is GeoGuessr. It is super fun to go play GeoGuessr and not use the pictures, right? So like you just have the map up. You can douse the map, or I like to like toss on my eye mask, pull up the Earth and have it rotate and try and figure out where it is. Now, for some reason, one of the things I keep getting with this is like, it'll be on like the opposite side of the Earth. I don't know why, but the more we practice these tools, the better we'll get at them. This is a pretty big one, and I want to talk to a specific viewer because he does a bunch of channeling, and it's because this is a really powerful tool, evocation, which is a magical concept when you get a perceived intelligent biological. And the reason why is like you can go interact with that biological. So like I was saying, if the aspect I decode it in my S1 or L2 and L3, L4 as a biological, I would follow it up with this where, you know, I have that hologram of the person looking there, and that's kind of like a game of 20 questions. So one of the biggest things that you need to know is, what do you even ask a person? Like if you had a person as a session, what would you ask them? I can't even tell you how many times I've gotten to that state and be like, I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't even know how to be conversational with you. Now, this is going to be that level of data that is expecting phrases and long form sentences and stuff. Sometimes you just get back symbolical responses. That's probably the best because then it's pretty easy. But yeah, it can be fun. And usually the first question I ask is just like, what is your relation to the target? What can you tell me about the target? And some level of data comes back. And yeah, you can also conjure up like a chatbot, like an LLM for as an expert at any one point in time. So let's say that you had a structure there that was historical or something. You could just be like, like in software, instantiate me a new LLM. Like you're in ChatGPT and you're like, I need you to be an expert about this perceived structure, right? Now you're going to tell me everything that you know. You can go do that. It's a really fun tool to use. In addition to this, you could merge with a bio, and I think that's what channeling would be, where you're now like, speak through me and like you feel what they are. Your second body state is overlaid with their second body state. You can get super weird and do a bunch of fun stuff with this. As you're doing your L2 aspect discovery, this is something that was notable in Birdie's TDSRV, the gingerbread, which is, I believe, on Remote Viewed's YouTube. It's somewhere online where like they have this, which is where I learned it from it. But the objective here is to probe a physical body of a biological, typically for health. My friend Jeff, incredibly good at doing body scans. Like he nails it every time. So when to invoke, same thing. You perceive the biological. You had a conversation with them, maybe like in the intangibles, you found out there was something health related. So here you just start looking at each point of them, probing, and trying to figure that out. So let's see here. You just point to a physical spot on the on them, or like their non-physical presence, and just probe for intuitive response. So example, what color are the eyes, lower back, pain, like how's the stomach fit, and whatever comes to mind, you log. Mind probes, also notable from Birdie's TDSRV implementation of this, which is to probe the instance of a mind. What's going on in there? When to invoke, same thing. When you get a biological, emotional impact, conscious condition, conscious thoughts, unconscious condition, fears, hopes, dreams, likes, dislikes, goals, non-goals, family, work, location, food, financial state. There's so much stuff here, or the intellectual personality type. There's so much stuff here that you can extract about somebody, especially if you start getting into like just general people targets like presidents and stuff, or missing persons cases. Like this is a really great tool to have, because then you get to know about somebody. Now, caveat there, this is invasive. Like it really is invasive, and there's a lot of people that wouldn't even go do that. So if you are going to execute this tool, really try and start with a probe. Like, is it ethical to go do so? Like the hill, like, should I even be here? Is this something that I should be doing? If not, bail out, don't do a mind probe. That's just my perspective on it. Concluding thoughts. You are the psychic. The point of a lot of this stuff is that nothing that I presented, none of these tools are doing the work. You are the person that is psychic. It's coming through you. You shouldn't trust me. You shouldn't trust anybody else. Like the person that you're supposed to be trusting in this process is your intuition itself, your subconscious. Like this is a personal thing that you're doing with you. If you wanted to learn this methodology that I'm doing, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I would start on paper. And the reason to start on paper, especially with that book that I recommended, the TRV book, it's just a phenomenal guide. You could also get the Foundations of Controlled Remote Viewing and look at some of those manuals as well. The reason why is you don't know what to probe. Like you have to remember all of these steps and levels and things to go probe and what to do, like it's the back of your hand. If when you're listening to a session that I do, it sounds like I'm just rambling off the top of my head, that's because I have memorized and ingrained these probes so much that I am not trying on purpose. It's just purposely flowing through, coming through. I'm not thinking about like, what do I need to go probe next? It's just, pops up and it is the next thing to do. Starting on paper can do that. I will end up publishing my own sort of template for what to do. One other opinion that I have here is that if you're going to do paper, some people like the concept of having to write everything out. So like taking a ruler and drawing a line and doing your stage 4, level 4 title and stuff. And that the process of it is kind of NLP and like, preps you for the habitual thing to do that. To me, every one of those steps, even if it is training me to get into that, it's pulling me away from target contact and it's engaging my analytical mind. If you're going to work on paper, if I was going to start over again, I would definitely use pre-printed out templates. And that's because I just want to log the data. I just want to get that. I don't want to, be doing all of the other grunt work. I want to be able to probe, stay in target contact, and get the data out. Now, additionally, if you did want to just skip the paper entirely, like you could, just peek under your eye mask and be like, what's the next thing that I need to look at? But the other thing is that early on, each one of those little pieces of data, you're not going to be getting the big data packets of the symbolic information that needs long form explanation. If you do, you're already pretty freaking psychic, and that's phenomenal. Great job. But for me, like that took a very long time to get that level of unfoldment, to get that out. So instead, you're going to get these nice little succinct words. It's going to be awkward silence, pauses. It's like you're waiting to get a response. It takes too long. You build a castle. It's great. But then you can go do your feedback session where you take your pen and you start saying, yes, this was right. No, this was not right. I still do that in my session debrief files. especially when I go extract real data like the sensory impressions or intangibles. That's one of the things that the file helps with. But if you're doing a long form audio session, it's a lot harder to do those feedback sessions, and it's really easy to do on paper. The other thing to learn AIM would be, I would encourage you to go learn as many psychic tools as you can. Like I was saying, it's not a rigid, you have to do this, you have to do that. Go learn the stage 2, L3, stage 4, L4, deconstruction. Go learn the way that CRV did deconstruction with the analytical subjects and topics and stuff. Go learn mind maps. Go learn what I'm saying, where like you do the intuitive loop of why does this remind me of that. Go learn multiple gestalts, single gestalt. Don't decode, describe like up, down, curved, left, right in your A or F. Learn all of the things. That's like my biggest piece of advice here is these are all tools in your tool set. And the more you know, the more convicted you're going to get. You can go, one of the things I'll do with audiobooks is I will not like an audiobook and I will finish it to completion, because whether I like it or not, I am building up conviction. You can go learn as many of these tools as you want. You may not like some of them, but what you will do is you will build conviction. And over time, your opinion will change. Some years you may not do decoding your results. Maybe you'll bring it back. Like really, like the more things that you know, just the better. And it's not specific. Rigid thinkers, though, if you change like the size of the pen ball, or like line paper versus non-line paper, boom, it's like that's no longer that method. The point of a lot of this stuff is flexibility, where yes, you're still doing the same thing. Do I still think I'm doing TRV? Mostly. Like I've just changed the canvas that it's on and moved proprioception to the dominant phase. And I'm like allowing myself to bring in a lot of other tools. Brett's book I mentioned brings in a lot of other tools as well. And he mentions them. So I don't even think I like got into like time exploration and stuff. But yeah, there's so many things that you can do. Go learn them all. The other thing you do to learn AIM sessions is to just go listen to them. For some reason, it's hard to comprehend. And I made this point in my Dave 2's Cowboy Manual, is that the data is coming through a lot more complex. There's a lot more explanations. It looks more freeform, but it's not. And it looks more freeform because in that stack of like binary data to complex data, symbolical, we're getting a lot more symbolical data coming through. So one of the things you can do to try and like learn and understand how to perform it is to go listen to it. And that really like can help show you like what's possible and like where to go. And like I was saying, the first time you get there, like you pull up a person, you're like, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm really bad at charades. Like, I don't even know what to ask. It's going to happen. So the other thing for AIM is just, as I was mentioning with psychic tools, always be willing to adapt. Like be a walking question mark. Always don't assume that you know what's going on. The entire purpose of this is to push the potential of what you can do forward, right? I've talked about with news is getting past describing and into naming, right? You're not supposed to name names, but wouldn't that be the next logical progression goal? Adapt, always think big. How can we get to the next level and make this real? And then why did I make this? I was going to make this video 4 or 5 months ago as like the video follow-up to the cowboy doc that I did as a more thing. It's now been a year since that cowboy doc. So this is like a year or more of thinking. My sessions have all gotten better. And the act of creating a method is what I mentioned earlier, metacognition, thinking about thinking. But then the act of trying to explain it over this video, teach other people, or at least get people to realize that like, my audio recordings really are just like regular old remote viewing with a lot of extra flair and things, is that it's thinking about how to communicate a method. So this is metacognition, thinking about thinking about thinking. In the process of thinking about thinking, I learned so much from this. To let you know how much I learned from this, I Well, man, I'm not crying. I'm just like been talking for an hour and 40 minutes now. For how much I learned from this, in September, I was going to do a video and I had a whole different presentation called like Intro to Visual Remote Viewing at the time. And even though like the core concepts were here, it was like a totally different presentation. Then I was like, man, in order to teach this, I gotta like start from scratch. So I signed up on like Teachable and Kajabi, and like I made like a whole curriculum. And I was like, okay, I have like 109 little micro videos that I'm gonna go make, and you know I'll teach this. And I'm like, we have to start on paper. So I pulled out my tablet and was like, okay, I'll just teach like regular old paper sessions. And then I'm like, now I gotta explain gestalts. And I gotta explain the autonomic nervous system and how to connect to it. So then after that, I had like a crisis and like was talking to the underground, and I was like, you know what? And I just made this slide deck in a couple hours and sent it around, got some feedback. And through that iteration loop, you know, like I learned a lot, and this is what this is. So does this teach everything? Is this like a training course? Definitely not. Am I offering training? Not really. But it's putting out all the ideas there. If there's interest in this, I definitely could take this further. I definitely could do those 109 videos, but I think it's a good introduction. And that's why I wanted to make this and get this out there. Is there are lots of ideas on methodology and how to do stuff. I've really, with this whole channel, there's so much beginner content out there. What can we do to advance the field, to push it forward, to get that accuracy? We heard from the telepathy tapes, those guys are getting, 10 out of 10, perfect stuff. Like we're sitting here in our like describing phase and stuff. What can we do to get more ingos? Like what can we do to push this field? That's really what I want to do. And that's what I'm trying to do with this methodology to push it forward. So contact if you want to get a hold of me. I realized I skipped this in some of my other stuff and people were like trying to find me. My YouTube, which this is posted to, is Uncontrolled Remote Viewing. I may change that because, as I was saying, the advanced intuitive method, this is intuition based. It's only remote viewing when it's under like a very specific set of things. You can use it for everything else. When I do my temple meditation, I said there's that part that I won't talk about. A lot of that is intuitive drive. And sometimes I got to bust out those level tools to explore what showed up to me. I may change it to like uncontrolled intuition or something else. I don't know, but obviously I'm going a lot deeper than just the blind protocol stuff that you're allowed to do here. And most of the time I am doing remote viewing, but I am pushing the bounds of what's there. You can email me at dave2@psychcommand.com. You can also email me at dave25405@proton.me. That was my Discord name. On the Discord server, I'm .dave2, Facebook, dave2. There's a link to my profile, and on Reddit, I'm user dave2-5405. Feel free to message me any questions on any of those platforms or comment in the video below, like and subscribe. Thank you for your hour and 43 minutes of attention. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you found this useful. End session.